Welcome everyone, and thank you to the Learning Planet for organizing this wonderful festival to celebrate the International Day of Education. My name is Tricia Taylor, and I will be the Master of Ceremony for today's webinar, which is a kickoff event for the scaling up of UNESCO's Happy Schools framework from Asia Pacific to the global context. Today, we have the pleasure of bringing together the voices of many people: policymakers, parents, teachers, government officials, UNESCO experts, and students to discuss the importance of happiness in schools and the link between well-being and better learning. This issue has been particularly poignant for all of us over the last 2 years, as school systems have worked hard to support students and teacher well-being through these unprecedented times. This topic is near and dear to me. I am a teacher, and I have been a teacher for the past 25 years in the US, the UK, and in Spain. I'm also the author of a book called Connect the Dots: The Collective Power of Relationships, Memory, and Mindset in the Classroom. And it is through my research into the connection between well-being and learning, as well as my interactions with young people, that I know that happiness matters in schools. I also know, as a classroom teacher, that having tools that we can readily use in the classroom will actually make that happen. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Boren Chakroun, and he will give the opening remarks. Boren is the director of the Division of Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO headquarters and has decades of experience in the field of skills development and lifelong learning. Boren, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tricia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our distinguished guests, teachers, parents, students, and all colleagues from all over the world. It's my pleasure today to welcome you all and to continue the celebration of the International Day of Education. In fact, we should be celebrating the day every day. And that's what I believe what teachers are doing, and learners as well. Dear colleagues, the ongoing pandemic caused unprecedented learning disruption. Even today, we have more than 53 million learners who are affected by the disruption in many countries all over the world. However, I think we all think that the crisis is also an opportunity for a paradigm shift in schooling to position collective well-being, school happiness as an entry point for better learning outcomes and for advancing SDG 4, which is our overall goal. Even before the pandemic, students' well-being was an increasingly significant issue for policymakers and for educators as a whole. As issues related to mental health, bullying in the school, virtual harassment, and other matters that have become impossible to ignore from a policy perspective and from the action of the international community and at the national level. But when we are speaking about well-being, what we exactly mean by well-being? What are the determinants of well-being? What can school system do to promote well-being? What can we do as a policymaker, as an international community, to support school system in this endeavor? And why is it important specifically? And of course, how the well-being and happiness link with the learning, with the better learning outcomes? All those questions have been growing, and they are important, and they became more prominent during the ongoing pandemic. A case in point is the results of our survey together with the International Evaluation of Education Association, IEA, what we call the RED survey. The survey showed that there is an increasing concern regarding the resilience, the capacity to respond to future challenges. Just one example that I would like to share. Over half of the students on average across the countries agreed that they have feeling of anxiety about change in the schools. Most of the teachers and school leaders showed the plea for help to get supported to get prepared for the future disruption. The findings highlight the well-being as an important dimension and a priority for future policy action. That's why today, colleagues, we are here to kick off our global call for resilience building, happiness and well-being for better learning. We are here to continue the work that we started doing in the Asia-Pacific region through and scale up the regional initiative, Happy Schools Framework. And we would like to put it at scale at the global level. We are here to support our teachers, students, parents who are calling for help. And finally, we are here to work together to build resilient and inclusive education system and lifelong learning opportunities for all. This is the goal of the SDG 4. I wish you happiness and well-being to all of you, a successful meeting today. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tricia.
Okay, thank you very much, Boren, for emphasizing the timeliness of the topic as well as that connection between happiness and learning. Especially at this time, given the toll of COVID-19 has taken on teacher and student well-being in all schools around the world. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Shigeru Aoyagi, the Director of UNESCO Bangkok Asian Pacific Regional Bureau for Education. Having served in Tokyo, Paris, Kabul, and New Delhi, Shigeru has worked in education systems all around the world. Shigeru-san is joining us offline today via a pre-recorded video.
Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, I'm very delighted to welcome all of you to this important event on the occasion of the week of the 2022 International Day of Education celebrations. Notably, this year's theme is especially timely, changing course, transforming education. Today, as we announce and celebrate the global launch of the UNESCO's Happy School Guide and Toolkit, it is apt that on this International Day of Education, the global education community is reflecting on and engaging in dialogue on how to nurture transformations in education that will build sustainable and peaceful futures. This toolkit is a timely resource for fostering happiness, learners' well-being, and social and emotional learning as COVID-19 continues to pose challenges that burden learners, teachers, and families. This is indeed an opportune moment to share with the world this philosophical example from Asia, which can be scaled up to transform education systems not only regionally but globally. The Happy Schools project at UNESCO Bangkok has deep roots reaching back to 2014, well before the pandemic. Happy School is an insightful response to the challenges implied in competitive, stress-fueled, and test-focused education. We need to actively promote happiness and well-being for our children to be successful. The Happy Schools project is thus transformative and combines learning to be with learning to live together with the field of positive philosophy to help forge transformative education. Transformative education is the underlying principle at the core of peace education and human rights education, or SDG 4.7, and safe learning environments in SDG 4.B. As we continue to grapple with the pandemic, and as today's situation offers valuable practice for the future, achieving transformative education that ensures health and well-being of the learners and the teachers is more important than ever. The newly launched UNESCO and IEA study further validates the significance of supporting students and teachers' well-being. Education systems must be resilient and agile if they are to tackle challenges such as violent extremism, political transition, climate change, and more recently, the learning disruption and loss due to the pandemic. According to last year's joint UNICEF and UNESCO report, which is called COVID-19 Education Situation Analysis in Asia, the pandemic has caused increased levels of anxiety and stress in teachers, children, and young people in different ways. There are disproportionate effects on girls and the marginalized, including learners with special needs. Gender-based violence, child marriage, physical and mental abuse, and child labor have all increased during the pandemic. Along with ongoing mutations of the virus, case rates and hospitalizations of children is on the rise globally. Surely, this only adds to our children's stress levels. UNESCO's findings indicates that happy school in Asia Pacific is warm, conforming, and safe. The happy school is a place where learners build strong interpersonal relationships and are encouraged to learn and engage with others. The happy school is where teachers and all staff actively interact with learners, encouraging creativity and collaboration, mutual respect, and care for one another. The happy school is finally a place where every parent can trust that our children's well-being is everyone's concern. Since 2014, there has been a growing body of research highlighting the crucial relationship between happiness and learning. Schools that prioritize learners' well-being are usually more effective. This means better learning outcomes for potentially happier and more productive international citizens. Investment in our children's happiness and well-being is, therefore, a judicious and cost-effective way to promote world happiness and ultimately a sustainable peace. Every child deserves to be happy throughout their learning, and UNESCO hopes that Happy Schools Guidance Toolkit will play a dynamic and proactive role in these especially challenging times of COVID-19. Equipped with this guide and toolkit, teachers and school leaders can better foster empathy, compassion, connectedness, focus, and, of course, happiness, not just amongst learners, but amongst the entire education community. A key message of this day is that all our interventions addressing children's well-being and mental health now call for a systemic approach, one that integrates the concept of happy school in every educational endeavor and for all stakeholders. Dear participants, I'm especially delighted to welcome the distinguished panelists from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, who will share their perspectives on what makes for successful happy schools in their respective regions, and then continue to discuss how happy schools can be rolled out globally and adapted to local context. This is a critically important conversation to be held at this historic pandemic-wide juncture, and your perspectives will be invaluable to all our discussions today. Finally, I sincerely thank my dedicated colleagues for their efforts in scaling up the Happy School regional attempts to a global level. And for this, we value our partnership with the UNESCO International Bureau of Education, or IBE, in Geneva, and the Division for Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems to mainstream the concept of happy school across education systems worldwide. I believe that our committed policymakers, teachers, school leaders, parents, and key stakeholders can make great use of UNESCO's Happy School Guidance Toolkit in bringing hope and joy into the lives of our teachers, our young learners, and all our communities. I thank you.
Okay, Thank you so much, Shigeru and Borin, for setting the stage today for our discussion about why going global with the Happy Schools framework is so relevant and so important. And it's so great to see so many people joining in from all over the world in this webinar today. In this session, we will hear now from two UNESCO speakers. First, Ms. Marguerite Sachs-Israel, who is the chief of the section for inclusive quality education. She'll speak about the origin, rationale, and development of the Asia-Pacific Happy Schools framework. And second, we'll have a speaker, Ms. Farrell Khan, an education program specialist at UNESCO Bangkok. And she will present the Happy Schools Guide and Toolkit. So we'll get practical in that session. So first off, Marguerite, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to this session. So today, at the occasion of the International Day of Education, it is my great pleasure to launch the Happy School Guide and Toolkit for Asia and the Pacific region, which will also be used beyond the region, and that is really wonderful news. So as was just presented, to begin with, please allow me to share with you the origin and the development of this initiative, which we believe might be useful information for those of you with us today who would like to replicate and adapt this framework in their particular context. So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, let me just continue. The initial concept of Happy Schools was launched in June 2014 by UNESCO Bangkok as a regional initiative in the Asia-Pacific region with the aim of promoting happiness, well-being, and holistic development in schools. The concept is based on UNESCO's very basic mandate to promote peace through education. And based on this conceptual framework, an initial hypothesis consisting of potential criteria of what makes a happy school was developed, drawing to start with on findings from desk research. As you can see, the objectives of the Happy School are to promote learners' well-being and happiness, build capacities of teachers and school leaders in K-12 formal education in the Asian Pacific region. Next slide. Okay, in 2016, the Happy School framework was developed. So this was done, and I think this is very important, through a bottom-up approach that really involved all the key stakeholders that are really concerned by this concept and by being in school. So that meant holding workshops with students and teachers from 9 Asian countries on the one hand, and on the other hand to undertake a survey to collect views from students, from their parents, from the community, but also very importantly, obviously from teachers, school leaders, school principals, but also school support staff and the general public on basically 3 main questions. First is, what makes school a happy place? The second question was, how can teaching and learning be enjoyable? And what can be done to make students feel included in schools? So the analysis of the data received informed the development of the framework. So in sum, we can say that a happy school promotes education in which learners' unique talents, strengths, and abilities are appreciated, recognized, and valued. So the next one, we have the 3 categories now. So if we look at the Happy School framework, we basically talk about 3 main categories, which you now have in front of you. So the first category is people. That is referring to the need for positive relationships. The second category, again, you see here, is process, and that means referring to the importance of fun and engaging learning approaches. And finally, the place, which means to create a school environment that is safe, free of bullying, and making teaching and learning enjoyable. Obviously, all of these three categories, they're interconnected and they mutually reinforce each other. Next slide, please. So from 2018 to 2020, the Happy School Framework was piloted in 3 countries. You can see here in Japan, Lao PDR in Thailand. And so out of this pilot, it was very important to see really how did this function, how did this translate actually at the country level. So important lessons were learned from the pilot, which were then included in the finalization of the framework. And these are, so learners' well-being and happiness really begins with a teacher's positive attitude. Secondly, the leadership from and by school management level is key. So we really need to have a whole school approach here. And so this is the third lesson that the whole school approach needs to engage with all possible stakeholders of the school community. So it cannot just be the teacher, it cannot just be the principal, it needs to be the entire school that works on this approach. Fourthly, all schools that used the framework really found that a rethinking of existing pedagogical approaches was required. And that then it was also found that the Happy School aligns with the broader educational targets found in ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, Global Citizenship Education, and the SDGs as such. And then obviously, and I think that is very important as we now are about to roll this out across the world, adapting the Happy School concept needs to be adapted to the context in which it is applied, and it needs to be, of course, adapted to each particular school and local context. Next. So just to say that the guide was finalized in December 21. So it's basically fresh off the press, ready to go. So this is a very timely launch and meeting. And so now I'm very happy to give the floor to my colleague Farial to introduce the new guide and toolkit. Over to you, Farial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marguerite, for providing an overview of the cogent trajectory that has brought us here today. And thank you to all of our partners at headquarters for making this collaboration possible. It's really our distinct pleasure to launch the Happy Schools Guide and Toolkit with all of you together today. The guide and the toolkit intend to support teachers and school leaders of primary and secondary schools in the Asia Pacific region to reflect upon how to create their own happy schools for learners, teachers, and the entire school community. The Happy Schools Guide introduces key themes and concepts, helps develop an annual Happy Schools action plan, and monitor happiness at the school and classroom level. It includes activities that school leaders and teachers can use to incorporate happiness as part of school management. The Happy Schools Toolkit is composed of 25 lessons under 3 themes: happy learners, happy classrooms, and happy environments. And teachers can utilize, select, adapt the lessons in the toolkit to cultivate happiness and well-being within different contexts, as Marguerite just mentioned, and in response to diversity of learners' needs. You can download the guide and the toolkit, and the link is provided in chat. It's available also on the UNESCO Bangkok website. So next, please. COVID-19 has really highlighted the impact on education and the relevance of happy schools for learners' well-being and happiness. As we are seeing, the REDS report, just now, Marguerite referred to that, which was launched during the part of the last few days. We have declining mental health. Students are experiencing depression and anxiety, Counselors do not have the training to support them. There are economic constraints. Some learners are finding it hard to pay school fees. There's disparate access to technology, and girls often do not have cell phone and electronic devices within the household. It is usually boys and men or adults who monopolize the new technology within the households. There's learning loss. Teachers are not always prepared. And as the recent reports are telling us, parental burden is on the increase as parents take on increasing responsibilities to support learning. In all of this, I want to mention that there is a disproportionate impact on girls, and this has been pointed out in the UNESCO and UNICEF COVID-19 education situation analysis for Asia and the Pacific, and also from a paper recently presented at Harvard on COVID-19, strengthening delivery of gender responsive education in Kenya. And since we are looking at these issues in Africa as well, the girls are having issues of sexual and gender-based violence. There's a digital gender divide. There's increase in girls reporting that their household chores are on the increased compared with boys. And sometimes there are discriminatory practices on the part of schools. Girls in rural communities are further at risk of dropping out. So this has implications for learners' well-being and happiness. Next, please. So I just want to conclude with 3 takeaway messages. As we scale up happy schools and reflect on the futures of happy schools, here are some reflections from our experience in Asia and the Pacific region. The first is we need to understand happiness. Within a different context, how do stakeholders understand happiness? What does it mean? How is it interpreted? And what are some of the concrete needs and challenges and opportunities that need to be taken into consideration as we look at happy schools? This brings us to the importance of context and localized definitions of happiness. Are they aligning with language, culture, and value systems? Learners' perspectives may vary for girls, boys, or another gender, and for learners with different abilities and those from different socioeconomic contexts. And this means we need to have diversified approaches and nuanced responses. So the last key message is happiness within schools calls for a systemic response. Education systems need to have an integrated response to prepare interventions as we build a better future for education. The concept of happiness needs to be integrated within education policy, strategy, finance, governance, curriculum, teacher training, pedagogy, and assessments. So if we remember nothing else from this presentation, the one thing is happiness, it's not just about learners, but also teachers and parents who deserve to be happy. In fact, all of us working in education. So this is my key message to you. Thank you so much. And we are very excited to partner with our colleagues at headquarters and IBE to scale this initiative to global level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marguerite and Fariel, for sharing the origin story of Happy Schools and how this important initiative is continuing to develop. Your presentations were illuminating. Our next session, to carry on, is a panel session that will bring together the voices of teachers and school leaders, policymakers, parents, and students to share their thoughts on happiness in schools during the pilot and also during COVID-19. So we will start by hearing firsthand accounts from those directly involved in the pilot program for Happy Schools. Then we'll bring in some voices from all over the globe to share their thoughts on that link between happiness and better learning. So now I'm going to pass over the floor to our 2 moderators, Sarah Bin Mahfouz and Juliet Norman Smith, who work at the section of education policy at UNESCO headquarters and who will lead this discussion to introduce each of our 7 speakers. So, over to you.
Thank you very much, Trisha, for the introduction, and thanks to my colleagues to putting the scene. I would like to begin our panel discussion with an interactive activity so that all our webinar participants can have their voices heard. In the chat, you will see a link to a question where we would like you all to anonymously answer to this question. So the question reads, based on your experience, what makes you happy at school? And I'll ask my colleague to share the screen for the result. Jiang, you may share the screen. Have you received the, Elise, maybe you can share the link in the chat. Yes, so we see kind teachers. I see my friends make me happy. I see no tests. I hope we have some teachers here following. And I see arts programs. Thank you, keep them coming. This will shape our global vision. And now I hand over to Juliet.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Let's give a little more time just to get some more answers. I see respect, learning, friends a couple of times. Yeah, thank you so much for these great answers. This question will help us start to consider what the positive relationship is between well-being, engagement, and better learning, which is really our topic today, how these 3 things come together to make a happy school community. If we want students to want to learn, then we should strive to make learning environments supportive, engaging, and joyful. So I'll take another quick look at this. We have freedom, feeling cared for, student voice, personal connections. These are really, really great answers. So keep filling it in, but for now, I'm going to pass it back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Juliet. Thank you, everyone. So today we are thrilled to kickstart our panel discussion on the importance of happiness in school with Ms. Kichi Uyasu, who is the Director of Education Cooperation Department in the Asia Pacific Cultural Center for UNESCO. He also worked for UNESCO Bangkok and Dhaka as a program specialist for promoting education for all and education for sustainable development. Today, he will be sharing with us his valuable experience from Japan pilot of the Happy School Framework. In fact, he spearheaded the pilot implementation. Thank you very much for being with us today, Kichi-san. First, given your experience piloting the program, what was the biggest challenge to the implementation of a Happy School Framework to promote learner well-being and happiness in Japan? Kichi-san, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. When the idea of a happy school project was introduced in the National Forum in 2018, responses from participants, in particular teachers, were not very positive. They said they are not very happy about the situation. And as you know, teachers are very busy with day-to-day teaching and also administrative responsibilities. And so they are a bit afraid the additional burdens from this new project, Happy School. So I would say this kind of mindset of not only teachers or schools, but also our society is one of the biggest challenges to initiate this Happy School project in Japan. At the same time, many of them, the teachers said, if teachers are happy, the school will be happy. And also students will be happy too. So how teachers become happy was an entry point of this project participated by 5 schools, including primary, junior, secondary, and also senior secondary schools in the country. So let me add a little bit how we responded. We initiated the project through a workshop to learn the theory about the happiness, as Farial mentioned, and well-being, and then analyze their feeling and conditions of each participating teacher and also school by themselves about both positive and negative aspects. And what they found was put into some keywords. and also visualized through mind maps and problem and solution trees for sharing and dialogue with each other. As I mentioned, teachers and school managers are very busy, and they usually don't have time to stop and think about what happiness means. I think it's common to us too, to think about, we don't have much time to what the happiness is. And this kind of self-reflection for happiness and also the dialogue with peer was a good first step to take. And then each teacher and school came up with some concrete action plans, then started with the small steps such as eye contacts and greetings, say hello, and using approaches of mindfulness. So concluding my response to your question about the challenge, we may seek for a quick answer for happiness, but what we need, I suppose, is small steps of concrete actions. So after developing good basis of relationships, we can move on to teaching, learning, and management aspects, such as collaboration mechanisms among teachers and students' participation in formulating school regulations. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your first-hand experience. I hope we have some teachers here who are listening and then can learn from this experience. So the second question, briefly, as we're planning to scale up this initiative, what advice would you give to improve the Happy School initiative?
Okay, well, I suggest the whole school approach be extended to including parents, family, and community stakeholders to discuss and act for happy school and also happy community, particularly under this pandemic situation, as introduced earlier. Also, I found the framework and the tools introduced in the guide useful for non-formal education institutions, such as community-based learning centers or adult learning centers, and also tertiary education institutions, as well as other sectors. So the framework can be utilized in broader context and mobilize the dialogues among stakeholders in the local community. I just got an update from one of the participating schools of the project that is also one of the UNESCO associated schools in the country. And they include happiness as a school motto together with ESD, and informed parents and the community school through the school newsletter. And such case stories and various kind of models of different contexts can be shared through this kind of forum today. And because of the current pandemic situation, it may be difficult to organize face-to-face sessions, but we now have good online tools, and also we can use traditional media, including radio, as well as offline means such as letters. Personally, I feel letters heartwarming than SNS messages, and that can mobilize the dialogues and in the school and also in the community. So my last point, as we received the final version of the guide, we are thinking to translate into Japanese, not only language, but also the content and meaning. So for the improvement, we hope to have good dialogue with the school and community stakeholders for this translation process to make it relevant and useful for all of us. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as this is a kickoff event, we hope the future events will have more knowledge sharing with other countries to learn, just as you were saying. So thank you for your really insightful comments on the importance of community building and collaboration in the success of the Happy School framework, which will shape our global vision. Now over to you, Juliet.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So our second speaker is a primary school English teacher from Lao People's Democratic Republic, Ms. Phet Simone, who is joined by her colleague, Ms. Sengpapa, from the Lao National Commission for UNESCO, who will help translate today. Both Fetsimone and Sengpapa participated in the pilot implementation of the Happy Schools framework. And thank you both so much for being with us. So let me start with my first question. Fetsimone, you have experience teaching with the Happy Schools framework. So what was one activity from the curriculum that your students really enjoyed? And how did this activity lead to better learning? So Fetsimone, to you first, and then Sengpapa, over to you to translate. Thank you.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you, UNESCO, to give me an opportunity to share my thoughts and experience on Happy School project. Today, please allow me to speak in Lao language, and my Sengpapa will help me translate into English. หนึ่งในกิจกรรมที่พวกเราได้จัดตั้งปฏิบัติชื่อว่ารักษาสภาพแวดล้อมที่ดีในโรงเรียนกิจกรรมแม้ได้จัดขึ้นทั้งในโรงเรียนและนอกห้องเรียนซึ่งได้สอนในวิชาชีพพื้นฐานและวิชาสิ่งแวดล้อมซึ่งนักเรียนได้เรียนรู้วิธีปลูกผักและรักษาสิ่งแวดล้อมไปพร้อมๆกันกิจกรรมของพวกเรานอนอยู่ในกรอบแนวความคิดของเรียนพาสุขโดยซุ่มใส่วิธีการสอนและการเรียนที่ม่วนและมีส่วนร่วมกิจกรรมดังกล่าวสร้างขึ้นจากปัญหาสิ่งแวดล้อมที่เกิดขึ้นในโรงเรียนก็คือจำนวนขี้เหงื่อในโรงเรียนที่เพิ่มขึ้นธนาคารขี้เหงื่อเพื่อเก็บเมียนขี้เหงื่อแม้นมีจำกัดและการทิ้งขี้เหงื่อก็มีค่าใช้จ่ายหลายขึ้นฉะนั้นครูอาจารย์และนักเรียนจึงได้สร้างกิจกรรมน้อยๆเพื่อจับลดจำนวนขี้เหงื่อโดยการนำเอาจอกมีและกระตุกน้ำมานำใส่คืนเพื่อปลูกผักและนำใส่ท่อดูดที่ใส่แล้วมาประดับประดาหัวสวนของเรียนโดยมีนักเรียนทุกชั้นเข้าร่วมจากกิจกรรมดังกล่าวนักเรียนได้เรียนรู้ในการสร้างความอดทนการสมจิตสมใจการร่วมมือการเฮ็ดเวียกเป็นทีมและสร้างทักษะทางสังคมพวกเขาเจ้าได้สร้างความมั่นใจให้ตนเองและความสามารถพร้อมกับทักษะและความรู้ใหม่ในการปลูกเสบียงอาหารและการนำใช้คืนสิ่งเศษเหลือที่มีความสำคัญสำหรับทักษะในศตวรรษที่21
One of the activities that I would like to share names keeping the good environment in the school areas. The activity was taking part in classroom as well as outside the classroom. It was taught in basic vocational subject and environmental subjects, which students learned how to grow vegetable and save environment at the same time. The activities embeds in the Happy School framework on the process category and the criteria named fun and engaging teaching and learning approaches. The activity also created from the environmental problem occur at school, which is the increasing number of rubbish in the school, the rubbish bank to keep rubbish waste limited, and it was more costly to dispose that rubbish. Therefore, teachers and students have created a small activity to decrease the number of rubbish by recycling noodle cups and bottles to plant vegetables and using the used straws to decorate the fence of the school garden. Students in every class plant the vegetable by using recycling waste. From this activity, students learned to increase concentrations and patience, as well as cooperation, teamwork, and social skills. They gained self-confidence and also a sense of capableness, along with new skills and also knowledge in food growing and waste recycling, which is vital for 21st century skills.
Thank you both so much. So it seems that many of the Happy Schools activities were outside and physically involved, so were probably challenged by COVID-19 school closures. So I'm wondering, how did you try to make distance learning joyful? And could you give us an example of how perhaps one of those activities was translated to distance learning and led to an improvement in your students' English? And please keep it brief because we're a little over time. Thank you. So Fetsimone, to you.
ในระยะโควิด -19 โรงเรียนของพวกเราได้นำใช้การเรียนทางไกลผ่าน WhatsApp และ Zoom เรียนอยู่เรือนนักเรียนพบปะกันผ่านจอและบ่สามารถเฮ็ดกิจกรรมแบบหน้าต่อหน้าได้พ ราะฉะนั้นในวิชาของข้าพเจ้าในฐานะเป็นครูสอนภาษาอังกฤษข้าพเจ้าได้ให้นักเรียนเรียนรู้จากอินเทอร์เน็ตซึ่งก็เป็นวิธีการที่เป็นประโยชน์อย่างหนึ่งในท้ายชั่วโมงข้าพเจ้าได้ให้บทฝึกหัดแก่นักเรียนตัวอย่างกิจกรรมการออกเสียงข้าพเจ้าได้ให้นักเรียนเฮ็ดคลิปวิดีโอและเสียงสำหรับการอ่านบทความหลังจากนั้นให้พวกเขาฝึกโดยการซอกหาการออกเสียงจาก Google ในเวลาที่พวกเขาบ่แน่ใจการออกเสียงบางคำจากกิจกรรมดังกล่าวข้าพเจ้าสังเกตเห็นว่านักเรียนรู้สึกสบายใจและมั่นใจที่จะเว้าภาษาอังกฤษได้หลายกว่าเวลาเรียนต่อหน้าในห้องเรียนและเขาเจ้ามักจะส่ง SMS หาข้าพเจ้าเพื่อถามความทราบที่เขาเจ้าบ่เข้าใจ
During the COVID-19, our school is using distance learning through WhatsApp and Zoom for students to study at home. They meet each other virtual and cannot make face-to-face activities. Therefore, in my subject as an English teacher, I let students learn from internet and it is very useful for them. After teaching, I gave students some exercises, for instance, the pronunciation activities. I asked students to make a clip videos and audio for text reading, then let them practice by searching from Google when they do not understand or they are not sure how to pronounce some words. From this activity, I observed that students feel comfortable and confident to speak English than when learning face-to-face in classroom. And they often send SMS to me to ask words that they do not understand.
Great. Thank you so much, Fatsimon and Sengpapa. So as we learned earlier, the Happy School Framework pilot ended in 2020, right before the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that the educational landscape has changed significantly since then. And we want to find out more about how joy and community have been affected by school closures and distance learning. So now it's my pleasure to pass the floor to a teacher from Vietnam, a country that has recently joined the Happy Schools initiative, and so is perfectly placed to help us better understand how we can support student and teacher well-being to promote better learning throughout the pandemic. So I have two questions for Xuan, our teacher from Vietnam. Xuan is a psychoeducation teacher at Wellspring Saigon International Bilingual School, which means she wears two hats, that of a teacher and of a counselor, which I know from experience as a teacher is very common. We often either officially or not act as counselors for our students. So my question to you, Xuan, what were the challenges you faced not only to engage your students in their learning during the pandemic, but also to support their and your well-being for better learning? Xuan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Juliet. And first of all, from bottom of my heart, I'd like to express my gratitude for UNESCO, Wellspring School teammates, and my family for supporting me in this sharing. And it's also my pleasure to be here to share with you guys my experience as a teacher and a school counselor. The question reminds me about some of my first online social and emotional learning classes, and also about what I observed from other teachers. At that time, the big challenge for me and also for my student was the adaptations to the new methods and tools while keeping positive attitudes and positive energy. Yeah, to make it clearer, like other teachers, I had to convert the traditional lesson plans to the digital ones. And obviously, when we're on the way to adapt and learn new things, we have to try and error. Yeah, but the paradox here is when we do try and error, we gotta face struggle. And this struggle sometimes does not allow us to maintain our well-being state. Yeah. And similarly, I could see that our students have the same difficulties. They had to adapt with their new learning methods and tools too. Some of them actually have poor internet connections. Some were extremely exhausted sitting in front of the computer for a long time. Or some might take it as an excuse for not involved in the class, for less involved in the class activity. And yeah, as a result, it wasn't easy to get quick response from the students and also to get emotional interactions with them as the way we had done in the traditional classes. So, these kind of things cause a lot of stress for me and also for my students during that time. So yeah, from my experience, I think the balance between the adaptations to the new things while maintaining our well-being states is always the hardest part during the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Xuan. So I really loved what you said about trying and having errors and then trying again. So that sounds like it was a great lesson that you learned from navigating the challenge. Were there other lessons that you learned from these COVID-19 challenges, and did you develop any new initiatives as a result?
Yeah, sure. And so allow me to share my experience in not only the role of a teacher, but also the role of a psychological counselor at Wellspring School. And so as a SEL teacher, I found that to engage the student more online, I need to change from my fixed lesson plans to the flexible ones, which conducted by my student and me, which is known as co-creation. And the way I have been doing is that, first of all, I need to aware of my subject's core value, which are like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and so on. Then I try to link the lesson to my students' life by listening to them. And finally, it's the time for me to find the suitable tools and methods to deliver the lessons. So I would like to share some of my what I did with my student, which is like daily emotions checking, integrating music and arts into the class, or using a picture of a tree under the storm to metaphor for the students' well-being under the pandemic. Like by this way, I can see that my student can be aware of and share their own problems and solutions during the pandemic more easily. Yeah. And on the other hand, as a psychological counselor, I've learned that during the pandemic, we should pay extra attention to the well-being state of our teachers, students, and also parents. And what me, my teammates, and also other school members have been doing so far is that we have conducted a well-being survey for secondary and high school students. And based on that result, we adapt to the SEL lessons in order to provide own student tools to cope with their struggle and also create the prevention in the future. Moreover, we also conduct one-on-one counseling sessions for students in need. And beyond my team, Wellspring School also organize relevant workshops and fun activities with the whole school approach, such as Spirit Week, Sport Week, or Reading Week. Yeah. So from in my conclusion, from the experience I've shared above, I really want to emphasize that besides ensuring academic quality, school should enhance well-being states in the school community throughout carrying out a lot of practical activities, especially during this hard time of pandemic. When we have happy teachers and happy students, it's a happy school. Yeah. So thanks for your listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Xuan. Thank you for sharing. And you showed us how challenges can be transformed into opportunities. We've heard from our speakers about the challenges of supporting school happiness, especially throughout the pandemic. Now we will hear a system-wide perspective from an official at the Ministry of Education in Côte d'Ivoire. We have the pleasure to have Monsieur Binet, the Inspector of General Education with us today. I ask you to put your camera on, Monsieur Binet.
Yes.
Bonjour. Bonjour, Monsieur Binet.
Bonjour.
Yeah, so let's start. Supporting happy schools is a collective effort. We know that to have happy students, you need happy teachers. And my question to you has three parts. So first, what can governments and education officials do to ensure that schools are happy places for teachers and students? The second one, how has Côte d'Ivoire supported school communities throughout the pandemic? And finally, what are Côte d'Ivoire's future plans to ensure that happiness is a core principle of policy development? Monsieur Binet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me start by saying thank you for inviting me to be part of this important and timely webinar. I will share three things as you said. First, Science 2010, together with UNICEF, we launched the Child-Friendly School Initiative to ensure that schools operate the best interest of the child. School environment must therefore be safe, healthy, protective, with well-trained teachers, adequate resource, and the physical and emotional social condition conducive to the better learning. Second, during the pandemic, we launched a distance learning program called My School at Home to ensure continuity of learning. We also developed TV and the radio program to allow all students to continue to learn during the school closures, whether or not they had internet or device access. Third, we are now developing a new strategy for distance education to have a solid program for hybrid learning for students and teachers. In addition, we are undergoing a big transformation of our system. We are calling this the État général de l'éducation nationale, or the general state of education in Côte d'Ivoire, to have a new system for the development of school and the future of education. One of the main components is to make a teaching and the learning environment where happiness, joy to learn, and the sense of community is at the heart. As a general coordinator of this process, we want to express our appreciation to the International Bureau of Education for their support, their wise and precious conseil. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to continue collaboration of UNESCO. That is our experience concerning the 3 points you told.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Binet. Merci beaucoup. It's important that policy is always informed by the lived experiences of families. So with that, we will turn to a parent voice, and I'm really happy to introduce Effia, who is joining us from Belgium. Effia represents a community of 1,600 parents in Flanders, and her children attend a Freinet school, which is a type of school that's structured around project-based student-centered learning. So my question to you, Effia, is how does your school support a sense of community, and how did it help you support your children's well-being throughout the pandemic? So Effia, over to you.
Well, the school, or my experience, so it's a multi-layered situation. As for and every teacher in Belgium had to find ways to continue the teaching. And during the pandemic, there was a lot of fear. Schools were implementing the rules. The rules went to the parents, and the parents stayed alone with the situation being between employers and schools, having to elaborate all these tasks and consequences of these measures. And so my personal experience with 4 different teachers was totally different. I saw that the trust lowered towards the school from most parents, because nobody reached out asking how the children are doing or asking for the parents how they are doing. And so my one child got online schooling and my other child didn't have online schooling. So to take it in another grade and to being the voice of these 1,600 parents, we've witnessed that the trust dropped. And before the pandemic, the schools were the experts towards the children, and parents had a huge trust in schools. And this trust went down. So we have a platform where we help parents organize themselves in out-of-school care with a collaborative system. And we have seen that during the pandemic, many parents reached out, and even schools, to involve parents in the solution. And we have seen that giving the framework of insurances and methods to the parents, the trust between the school and the parents could be installed. We even have seen that children who had an experience with their parents at school had another relationship afterwards with the school, because the community came in to the school and it became part of the whole life system of a family. So this means it takes a village to raise a child. And I really want to mention that last year, a lot of parents reached out, taking their children out of schools because of this drop in the trust towards the schools. They were asking for support for home teaching in a collective way. So what I want to give as a message in general is that building bridges between parents, schools, and local governments is key to really create this village where a child can move, but also parents can find their own roles.
Thank you, Effie, for really showing us the meaning of it takes a village to raise a child. And now, to hear from the children themselves, we turn to Fanta Diawara, a high school student from France, to talk about the hardest part of the pandemic. Fanta?
Hello, Sarah.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. And you?
I'm good, thank you very much. So can you share with us what was the hardest part of the distance learning, and what did your school put in place for you?
I think that the hardest part for the learning distance was the fact that I wasn't seeing my teachers and my friends, but also the fact that I was learning alone at home, and the teachers were just giving us homeworks to do and to return back by École Direct. And they were not responding to our emails when we were sending them emails when we are not understanding what they are saying. And if you don't do your homeworks, they will give you warning, because they say that it was not good to not do their homeworks. But also I think that there were a lot of students who were taking that period as vacations, and they were not learning enough, that this thing lowered their level. And there, in the other hand, we have some classmates who were serious and who were trying to have the same rhythm as if they were going to school. I was trying to do that, but I said that it was really hard, because sometimes I just wear my pajama and I was just behind my laptop. So I was saying that it was not that important to wear right clothes. And I can say also that during the first sanitary confinement, we were not having lessons in online because some teachers were saying that it was not that important. So they were, as I said, giving us homework and that's it. But during the second confinement, we were going 1 week over 2 at school. So on the first week, it was the 11th grades who were at school while the 10th grade was at home. But the final students like terminal, they were always going to school because it was they had exams at the end of the year. And we were also using a lot École Directe, which is the platform of the school in which we can see our grades, and we can also exchange with our teachers and the director of the high school.
Great, thank you so much, Fanta, for sharing those stories of the challenges and also the ways that you were able to try to create this sense of community even throughout the pandemic. So finally, we have one more student speaker joining us today. Remas is a 4th grader from Palestine who is here with us today. How are you, Remas?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So my question to you is a simple one. So when you get up in the morning, what makes you the most excited to go to school? What's the best part of your day?
Seeing my friends and doing activities like in math, we do the times tables activities, like we go on our desks and the miss asks us times tables, and if you get it right, you stay on your desk, and if you get it wrong, you go on your seat. And in science, yesterday we did an activity. We got cotton and we made, because we're thinking about the water cycle, so we got cotton and we made the clouds, and we got some green paper and some blue paper, and we like the green is for the grass, or yeah, and the blue is for like the water.
Wow, that's really interesting. I love that example. So a lot of those things are related to you being in the physical classroom. So I'm interested, Remas, how did your teachers try to make fun activities throughout the pandemic, and what was maybe the hardest part about distance learning?
The teachers would send us like links of games, and the games would be like about the lesson, like spin the wheel, and the bad thing is that like you couldn't like move a lot, and like you would just stay like sitting and on your phone or on your iPad or on your computer just watching the teacher and like just focusing with the lesson.
Thank you so much, Remas, for sharing, and thank you to all of our speakers. Each one of you has brought a unique voice and a valuable voice, and we want to stress that these stories are just some of the multiplicity of school experiences out there, and we're just bringing a few today to kickstart our conversation about happy schools. Sarah?
Thank you, Juliet. Yeah, these stories are not necessarily representative of the experiences of all students or all teachers or all parents. And in fact, a lot of the work that UNESCO has done throughout the pandemic shows that digital divide remains a really big issue in many parts of the world. For example, we know that some students and teachers had access to strong internet, had access to devices, and had access to digital teaching and learning material. But many others did not, unfortunately. Some students were able to learn through TV and radio, some did not learn at all. However, with what our panelist stories all confirm is that happy teachers and engaging activities make happy learners who are eager to grow and to go to school. And now, with that, let's share with you what we are planning. So I'm thrilled to introduce my two speakers, my fellow UNESCO colleagues, Satoko Yano and Hong Lutu, program specialists in the education policy section, to speak about our aims to bring the Happy School framework global. Satoko, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. And then, yes, and thank you very much also to our panelists and speakers, both from the regions where the Happy School framework has been implemented, and also from France, Thailand, and Cote d'Ivoire, where the framework has not yet been implemented, but whose interventions and experiences and insights give us guidance and inspirations for the future expansion of the framework around the globe. Zion, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, I would like to invite all of us to think how and why this excellent regional initiative is relevant beyond Asia Pacific and what we should do to move from regional to global. Thank you. First, the regional Happy School framework generated a lot of interest from countries around the world. So UNESCO has been receiving requests from countries, both developed and developing and across regions, that are interested in happy schools. And then second, the research findings show that the culture of school and the relationships between students, teachers, and their peers influence very much their happiness and the learning outcomes. Third, we are experiencing COVID-19 happiness crisis. The ongoing health crisis has had significant repercussions on happiness worldwide. While emotional well-being is a complex and a challenging indicator to evaluate, numerous sources suggest that the pandemic is a crisis not only of the physical health, but of mental health and happiness. We are also very much concerned that such happiness crisis will exacerbate the learning crisis and vice versa. Fourth, we also believe that the pursuit of Happy School framework brings the critical alignment of SDG 4.1, which is about ensuring that everyone is in school and learning, and SDG 4.7, which is about promoting global values and then socio-emotional learning. So therefore, we believe that this is a high time for the Happy Schools to go global with the Global Happy School Initiative. So now I'm excited to share with you the stories from the large-scale survey we conducted on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on secondary education in 11 countries from across the world. With that, I will invite my colleague Fon to share some of the key findings of this survey. Thank you, Fon. To you.
Thank you, Satoko. Good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, friends, participants. It is my great pleasure to be here to share with you the fresh findings from the responses to Educational Disruption Survey or REDS report. Some of my colleagues have already shared the or mentioned the resume in their previous intervention. So due to time constraint, I will present selected findings relating to student and teachers' well-being and the support they received during the school disrupted periods. And there is still a lot that can be analyzed from this rich source of data. And I would like to invite you all to explore further the data set, which has been made accessible to the public. So here from this slide that you can see, we see that throughout the school disruption, about half or more than half of the students and teachers in all countries participating in REDS have reported the negative effects on their well-being. Sorry, I just wanted to check if the camera's still okay or on, because I don't see it on my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so regarding teachers' well-being, here in this slide, you see during the disruption, about half or more than teachers in all countries reported feeling worried about catching COVID-19 virus at work. And also they felt fatigue most of the time. At the same time, we see that they face challenges. Like most of teachers have reported increased workload. They have to cope with the challenges the challenge of changing job requirements to support their students and parents. Next slide, please. Here, from this slide, throughout the school disruption, there is a decline in student learning progress as perceived by the students themselves, by school teachers, by school principals. Here, we see the decline is more or disproportionately distributed or applies to the most disadvantaged and vulnerable group of students. That is those students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, those with migration background, or those with special needs. So all these findings, and what they can tell us about is that supporting student and teachers' well-being is important, especially during the school closures. And here, the support or school, we see the role of the school go beyond providing teaching and learning, and the school should and can play an important role in ensuring or providing social-emotional support to school staff, children, and also the whole of the school communities. So school leadership is important in supporting, providing, or ensuring social-emotional well-being of teachers and students. I stop here and would like to turn over to my colleague, Satoko, who will continue with the remaining of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juan, for sharing this very interesting insights, and which very much confirm our discussion and then call for urgent actions. So what can be the concept of the global happy schools then to address this double crisis? So we think that it sits at the intersection of the three key concepts here, well-being, engagement, and the better learning. Because there is an inseparable link between happiness and learning. As I mentioned earlier, the research supports this, with findings from many studies showing that the culture of school and the relationships between students, teachers, and then peers influence their happiness and learning outcomes. The visual here shows the strengths in one area will positively impact the others, and inversely, a weakness in one area will prevent growth in the others. So the Global Happy School concept also puts better learning at the center. And the main goal of the Global Happy Schools initiatives is to leverage well-being and engagement in schools to make them happy communities that can foster the love of learning, which ultimately improves learning outcomes for all and then builds the critical foundation of lifelong learning. The next slide, please. So what is going to happen now? So in order for us to move the Global Happy Schools initiative forward, we are working on the global framework development, which will be launched in March 2022 on the occasion of the International Day of Happiness. We are currently in the drafting mode. So if you're interested to be part of this exciting work, please get in touch with us and be part of the peer reviewing group shaping the global framework. So since every voice counts, and then we really count on you. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Hello again. Thank you so much, Sagoto and Hong, for such an interesting presentation, and also for the exciting idea to go global with the Happy Schools framework. We would like to open the floor now with our remaining time for questions to our speakers or panelists. So I'm going to put it back to you, Huang, for Q&A. So Huang will be our Q&A moderator. So over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we do receive a number of questions from the participants, and I would like to pick up probably two here. I hope the first one about how we will implement this model in school, and if there any need to structural changes in school. The participant who raised this question have already received the answer from the panelists. Here I would like to address or to pick up two questions. We have one from a participant from Vietnam. The question is about how teachers can make the changes in the parents' mindset of prioritizing academic achievement of the children rather than their happiness and well-being. For this question, I would like to invite the panelists, probably the representative from or the speaker from Belgium, the parents, and from their perspective, and if you can come in and maybe share your thinking, your thought, please.
Afia, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, I had something with my speakers and I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Okay, the question is that how do teachers can make the changes in the parents' mindset of prioritizing academic achievement of the children rather than their happiness and well-being?
Yeah, well, the first step is more dialogue. As for example, the whole topic of the pandemic has never been discussed, not even in the class. And so this dialogue is one thing, and the other thing is letting parents come into the school. I know in the pandemic situation, it's not an easy thing, but with our Kokido format, parents, during holidays or after school hours, they use the school to take care of the children. And this builds on a natural relationship between both parties.
Okay,
so,
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So sorry, because I'm conscious about the time, so maybe I'm sure we have many interesting insights that you can share. But let me just move to the other questions. We have two. We have four questions, but here are the two questions that I pick up. This question I would like to invite Kichi from Japan, because the questions ask specifically about the framework for student well-being, the teacher well-being. So the question is whether there is a framework for students and teacher well-being and whether they are combined or they are separate. Kichi, are you still there?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Well, as far as I know, there's no rigid framework, but according to the national curriculum standards, it emphasizes the competencies for living. That means not only the knowledge or academic performance, but also healthy body and also richness in mind. So this balance can make the students' well-being. And so all these activities, school activities should take this idea in mind. So that's how I would say as a kind of framework for the well-being. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you very much, Kichi. Yes, now we have 4 minutes, but I would like to stop the Q&A here, and we can, if you still have any more questions, you can always get in touch with us by email, and then we would be happy to answer to the question that you may have. And without further delay, I would like to turn over to my colleague Satoko and who will, if I understand correctly, who will share some closing remarks, right? So sorry, Sarah. Or are you
Hi,
there?
I'll just come in here.
Sorry, yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
No, that's great. Thank you, Huang, for leading the Q&A. This is a kickoff to Going Global, so I'm sure there's lots more time to address questions in the future. So with our final minute or so, I'm going to hand the floor over to Sadoko, who will give us some takeaways and some next steps for this important global initiative. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. And thank you very much to all our speakers from UNESCO Bangkok and headquarters, to our panelists from Japan, Vietnam, Laos, Cote d'Ivoire, Belgium, France, and Palestine, and to you, all the participants. Thank you all for joining us today. We had a very, very interesting discussion, and then it's always a challenge. The time is always a challenge, but as Tricia said, it's the kickoff so that we are going to have more opportunities to communicate in the future. So with, I think, about 160 participants today, it's really great to see so many joining from around the world to discuss this important topic. So today is again really just the start of this conversation, and we've heard from all levels of education system and just how important well-being is to creating school environments where everybody wants to learn and grow. And that's really the goal of the Global Happy Schools. It's as simple as that. But how we really do that with all the pressures and challenges this world is giving us these days is really far from simple. One thing is clear that should really be at the core of moving this Happy School initiative forward. We have to work together to do this. Well-being is a community-wide effort. We heard a lot from the many speakers. So this requires a shift in the focus to the school level to support teachers and the school leaders, because as we know, happy teachers make happy learners. Schools are communities. We cannot look at school level actors in silos. For teachers to support their students, they need support from colleagues, school leadership, and their governments. The REDS data gave us a plea for help. Our teachers, students, and school leaders do not feel prepared for future disruptions, and many of our most vulnerable learners feel the least prepared academically. The supporting well-being as a starting point is a timely way of thinking about recovery to the learning losses during the pandemic, and it's our first step to scaling up the global initiative. So please share with us any resources you have, any initiatives you have, and keep an eye out for our global discussions paper. We put on some links on the chat. It seems currently we have some technical problem, but then it will start working very soon. And then we also have a dedicated email address that then we can stay in touch. So thank you very much once again, and then have a wonderful day. Thank you.